Hello and welcome back to The Current. It's no exaggeration to say that Europe's data centre market is developing at breakneck speed. It's an economic success story, but one that comes with serious challenges, particularly for the power grid. This raises critical questions, especially in the era of AI workloads. With large language models driving exponential growth in power and cooling demand, operators are struggling to maintain key performance metrics like availability and PUE. Today, I'm joined by Keith Breed, Associate Director and Senior Research Analyst for Data Centres at CBRE. Keith will share the latest market forecasts and provide valuable insight into Europe's development pipeline. Joining us is Billy Dury, Global Sector Head for Data Centres at Aggreko. Working with clients across the world, Billy sees firsthand how operators are adapting to an increasingly constrained energy landscape. From temporary power and modular cooling solutions to integrating renewables and on-site generation, he'll explain why flexibility is now the industry's watchword. Keith, Billy, welcome to The Current.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so Keith, can you just tell us a bit more about your roles and responsibilities at CBRE?
Yep, I've been with CBRE now just over 3 years, and I've been looking after the research department. And basically, we're looking after the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region of the whole of the spread of Europe. And basically, we look after co-location space, we look at hyperscaler type developments, we monitor the whole landscape for data centers. We do forecasting and we support clients and we support our own business lines and Turner and Townsend and other people as well within CBRE, and try and help them actually understand how the market is developing, what the major trends are, what the major challenges are, and how we could possibly overcome them.
What about research interests? And obviously research is a part of your role.
Sure.
What are you mainly working on day to day?
We look at all the markets. So we look at the London, Amsterdam, Paris and Dublin, but we also look at the emerging markets as well, which are growing really, really quickly now. So we're looking at what we call the tier 2 markets, into the Nordics, where there's a huge amount of demand going on now because of the cold climate and the abundance of power and the amount of available power that there is now. And we're also looking at the southern part of Europe and the Mediterranean, Spain, Italy, those kind of countries where there's a huge growth potential, which is really just taken off. And we're also starting to look at the Middle East, where there's a huge dynamic market going on with Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular.
Yeah, brilliant. I guess from a slightly different perspective, Billy, you're more of a, technical guy, aren't you? At Aggreko, you're looking at power and cooling. So
well, it's a big part of the data center play for Aggreko for sure. Yeah. So much like Keith, the customers that we're interacting with from the hyperscalers all the way through to your colos and to your local players. And look, my role initially was about getting Aggreko set up, ready to go after the opportunity that's in front of us, basically with all this the data center build that's going on. A lot of what I do now is managing a lot of the larger accounts, and actually manage the global data center accounts team now. So that's part of my remit.
Interesting. Okay. Some standout projects then in that space over that time?
Well, I think that the main one, and that was the first hyperscale one that we did in the north of Holland. It's most of the projects and things that we're working on before were a bit smaller scales, more like banks and telco type stuff. 1 to 5 megawatt type of stuff. But working on a hyperscale project, to see the speed these guys move at, the scale that they move at, and the megawatts they're putting down is pretty impressive.
And just similarly, I suppose, interest and outlook. What interests you most about the market?
I think power or access to power in the right locations is a big challenge, big global challenge at the moment. There's definitely going to be I think there's going to be a step change in terms of what operators are doing. I think they're going to have to start to think looking at self-generation. And even the type of power is actually changing, right? So it's not just a straightforward linear sort of cloud type loads with the stuff that's coming in with AI. One, the need is much larger, but you're also getting a lot of transients and stuff like that, which makes the loads a little bit more difficult to power up. And following on from AI, from the power side of it, AI means denser racks. GPUs. Taken over from CPUs, so the cooling systems that are being implemented are starting to change as well. So, as you can imagine, that brings with its own challenges, especially when it comes to testing.
So, Keith, just following on from what Billy said there about the exponential growth in the market, what are the key factors driving the growth in Europe in particular, and how does the current pace compare with recent years?
I think Europe really started about 2016, or just a little bit before that, when the first cloud zones and the first hyperscalers started to come into Europe. And that was the real driving point. And that actually pushed everything from a retail enterprise perspective into a wholesale type perspective. And the actual amount of capacity required, the amount of power required actually went up quite significantly. And this continues to be the case when you have a cloud region. As a cloud region develops and it serves more people and it takes on more workloads, it also becomes part of an international ecosystem as well. There are lots of other cloud regions interconnecting to it. So you tend to find there are a lot of workloads being shared and transferred across Europe now. And that's happening more and more, and back to the States as well. So this is actually pushing up the market a huge amount. And the actual change recently has been the transition to AI, which has started in the United States, in North America, and now it's coming across to Europe. And it's just slowly starting in Europe now. We've had the large language models and we had workloads from the US being transferred into Europe. We're also getting the cloud companies, and we're also getting what we call the neo-cloud companies, who are buying surplus capacity, using GPUs and offering GPUs as a service to enterprises and to the hyperscalers. And the hyperscalers are starting to use these because this is a very quick route to market, very quick route to actually provide new computing capacity. And that's increasing the amount of capacity which is required in most of the larger data centers. So there are data centers in the UK which are now offering this kind of service. And there are others around Europe, around Germany, because of national sovereignty issues. But above all, there's a lot of capacity being built into Norway, into Finland, and into Sweden, because these are the areas where there's very low power costs, renewable power, and quite high availability of power, which has actually pushed that market right up to the fore now in the Nordics.
Would you say, and the pace of development, would you say that currently that pace is accelerating compared to, say, 2016, when the market really started to develop?
It is. There's peaks and troughs, and quite often it's constrained by power and availability and substation availability and all these things. And sometimes that means for a year or so there's a kind of hiatus where data center capacity cannot be actually put in straight away. And then when the power becomes available, so there's a huge lift off and it grows by 100, 200 megawatts or something like that. And then it kind of peaks and it kind of waits again for the next surge to come along. So it's a kind of peak and trough thing. So quite often it takes time. In other countries in Europe where there's more power availability, it tends to be much more even and much more progression going up. But on the whole, though, it's increasing all over Europe. And it's not just one country which is going up. Virtually all the countries are rising as well.
Billy, just coming over to you then. Given this expansion, I mean, I know you've spoken to me separately about this before, the pace and scale of change you've mentioned. How is Aggreko supporting with that development? I mean, there's obviously a power challenge here.
The power challenge is the big thing, isn't it? Right. So and Keith keeps talking about what's going on across Europe. It's the same everywhere. Same Asia. It's the same in North America. And like the Middle East, like you picked on earlier or picked up earlier. There's a massive expansion plan going everywhere. And look, we're in discussions with some hyperscalers in the US about 300 megawatt plus, right? And basically looking at a temporary solution. So it's mad what's going on. And it's basically electrons. They're either unavailable or they're in the wrong place. Connection times are getting pushed out now. We're seeing a lot more of that. When I first started out looking at data centers in the US, North Virginia, for example, the power was there just as soon as you built your data center. Everything was ready to rock and roll. And now we're seeing that's getting pushed out 3-5 years. In some cases, even saying no. It's just not going to be available. Some of that's short-term stuff. So that might be they might need power for construction or commissioning purposes. Some of it's much longer, so we'll start looking at like bridging solutions and what have you, using gas or using solar solutions. So someone wants to build somewhere, they want to build pretty quickly, they'll come to us for support on that. Touched on earlier about operators potentially going to have to self-generate. If they're going to have to self-generate, we need to start looking at grid competitive solutions as well, and where we can bring in as much renewable with it as well.
Are these issues, Keith, that chime with the conversations that you have with clients as well?
Absolutely. It's all about availability and getting it done quickly, I think. Particularly when you're talking to a AI company or a neo-cloud company, they want everything to be done really, really fast. So hyperscalers tend to take a long time horizon to some extent. When they actually develop a new site, they're talking about 5 years or 10 years. Whereas a neo-cloud, typically we're looking at months. It's basically about speed to market, get to market for quickly the GPUs, the latest Grace Blackwell GPU, get that installed and get it working. So then we get a payback straight away as soon as we can.
So those like practical challenges that Billy mentioned there,
Yeah.
do they regularly come up in conversation?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So basically, it's all about power. It's all about constraints. It's about how soon can you deliver. Basically, if you can't deliver by this time, we'll go somewhere else. Or we'll go to another country, or we'll go to another part of the UK, or we'll go somewhere where there is some kind of availability very quickly. Whereas the neo clouds have got a slightly different perspective. They just want to go anywhere where there is power which is available at a reasonable price, which means that the cost of the compute token comes down, so they can actually make money on it. That's the theory.
So that flexibility point that Billy mentioned there is absolutely key. So
yes, time to market is absolutely vital. But I think even in the Middle East or somewhere like that, it is about time to market as well. So we want to get the large language models up and running quickly. They want to get the processing started up. Then they want to come back and do the inference at a later stage when that's when the actual major model is developed.
What are those conversations like with co-location clients in particular at the moment? What do they look like? What are the pain points, I suppose?
I think there are a number of pain points. I mean, basically, it's first of all, can you get the power and can you upgrade and can you actually make this work over the next 5-10 years? And so is it sustainable over a longer period? And I think the second thing which is coming in, which is quite new in Europe now, is regulation, particularly in the EU. And there's what's called the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is quite a large piece of legislation which has been winding its way across Europe. And for some, that's going to be a really big challenge, particularly when you're a relatively small co-location provider. And it's going to mean an awful lot of investment. So that is a challenge. Regulation is a challenge, and also the actual availability of power is a challenge. Those are the two big things which are going to impact things going forward.
That's interesting in itself, isn't it? Like that idea of consensus obviously speaks to the complexity of delivery, which is obviously where, like, Billy, your team comes in, really, isn't it? Because it's no solution is the same, and I suppose you're going to sites and they're fairly unique challenges wherever you go, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know our customers want to build with cookie cutter type solutions, but kind of where we fit in it, every scenario is different. But we're trying to do our piece to sort of like keep up with these guys, expanding our own sort of footprint, especially places like Asia. We're expanding our depot network to keep up with it, but also starting to expand on our fleet as well. Investing quite heavily in it to keep up the demand. So, just about all the new generators that we're putting into the marketplace now for Europe and for the US, in line with what we're talking about in terms of like legislation and what have you, are all stage 5, tier 4 final. So we're making sure that we're trying to stay ahead of the curve from an emissions point of view. Customers have got themselves, we're talking about the legislation piece, some pretty strict sort of or tight sort of ESG targets that they're trying to meet. So our product mix, we're trying to make sure that we can cater for those guys. So investing quite heavily in more gas generators for prime power type applications, investing quite heavily in BESS, right? That adds a little bit of resilience to people's systems. And Aggreko itself, we've made some pretty bold statements ourselves about our green initiatives. We're basically saying that by 2035 we want to be net zero on our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and by 2030 we want to reduce the amount of emissions that our equipment produces for our customers as well. Keith, what's your sort of view on when it comes to the selecting of power? I mean, mine is about, I think what my view is that the first thing is access to reliable and cheap power, and then the greener bit comes on the end of that. I don't know what your view is from site selection type setups.
It is now about whether it is sustainable, whether it is green, whether it's actually a very, very efficient data center, whether it is upgradable, whether it can actually cope with the ESG type matrix which are being developed now. And that's more and more important, I think, from an investment point of view. Even though in the States the political environment may be changing, that still seems to be the case.
Yeah, I was going to say that's
and even in the States where you have places like Texas, there are huge amounts of private equity money being thrown into the solar development as well into renewable energy, just because the grid is under pressure, and so you need to have a diversity of supply now. So that's becoming more and more important. I think the US has set the trend really, and it's basically following the US now. Europe is trying to catch up to the US, and also trying to catch up with China as well when it comes to AI and putting in large language models and actually doing really large scale data center developments.
Keith, I know you've mentioned there about investor relations, I suppose.
Yes.
The confidence remains strong, yet challenges around power availability, land scarcity, and permitting delays continue.
Sure.
How is CBRE addressing those issues in particular?
Well, we're trying to do our best. I mean, basically what we're doing is we're dealing with the local governments and trying to get a community approach, if you like. So we're talking to Tech UK and all these people to try and actually provide more information on data centers and the kind of benefits they can bring to the community as a whole and to the local authority. And we're trying to educate the kind of stakeholders, if you like, whether it be the water companies or the power company or the other people involved in actually providing the services, to try and encourage them to do so. And the other thing we're trying to do is to try and build up, if you like, a kind of relationship with the major operators and also the government as well, to try and make sure that they understand how important data centers are in the future and how much they need support and what is the benefits from having a data center in this area. That's really important. And a lot of it hinges from the government's point of view on digital sovereignty as well. Whether you can actually you need to have a certain key amount of capacity yourself, which you can manage yourself, to actually allow you to actually provide services for, I don't know, the NHS or for the Ministry of Defence or these other kind of large public sector departments. So that's really important.
Digital sovereignty is an interesting phrase, I guess, because how does that change the conversation, I suppose?
Well, I think one of the issues is if you're talking about digital or data sovereignty, then you basically need to have a really good comprehensive solution within country. And you need to be able to actually offer this on a widespread basis. And over time, I think what will happen is the data center business will evolve. It'll go from being maybe a number of very large hyperscaler data centers, and eventually with inference and AI coming into the enterprise, it will be distributed more and more throughout the country. And then you'll probably need to have a wide number of relatively small but very compact and high density data centers with low latency to actually address the surrounding population and all the enterprises in that area, so on a regional basis. In the future, it'll probably have to be diversified and spread further out. So you need to have Newcastle and Liverpool and Manchester and all these other towns and cities actually have their own data centers as well to actually supply local needs.
So Billy, just moving on, in practical terms, how is Aggreko helping clients mitigate project delays? Because I know like penalties for late completion and commissioning is obviously a big thing in this market. What's the company doing?
Well, from a utility play, I suppose, when it comes down to like the commissioning or the construction elements of it, obviously power to make the buildings glow is key. With Aggreko, though, we're quite, with what we've got in our toolbox, we kind of cover the whole life cycle of a data center.
Yeah.
And, from construction, the commissioning, where we play as a utility play, upgrades, refurbs, and emergencies. We've got all those sort of solutions in our box, and even at construction, it can be quite diverse. I mean, it might be power that they're going to need for the commissioning process. It might be power that they're going to use for site cabins and what have you, or general construction. It might be things like if they've got a delay with construction because of a supply chain delay or something like that, they may look to us to put a piece of equipment in there to help them get back on track. Or we're doing quite a lot of temporary UPS packages at the moment, where you've got a construction piece, you've got a commissioning piece, and then you've got a networking piece where the IT guys go in and do their magic and get stuff online. If there's a delay with the construction on the commissioning piece, you're still potentially you're going to be turning lights on and off, which isn't good for the network guys. So we've done quite a lot of like temporary UPS packages to try and catch it up. And I've been speaking quite a lot about power, because that's probably what most people know Aggreko for. But the flip side of our business is actually temperature control. So we have the capability for cooling, so chillers, air handling units, whatever you need. dehumidification packages and heat. Not normally something you want in a data center, but we do a lot of validation of warranties, right? So if, let's say, an OEM is going to drop some equipment curbside, and it's not going to be stored at the right sort of environment, be it from a relative humidity perspective or from a temperature perspective, we can help commission or condition those sorts of environments so that they don't actually void the warranties. And there's so much more that goes on from a construction piece. But the second part, the commissioning element, again, this is about making things glow. So that might be like larger load banks for testing your generators, your UPSs. It might be smaller equipment that we're going to put inside the building to create the IT load to test that. And now with what's coming with AI, starting to look at the liquid cooled stuff. And data centers, I'm talking quite a lot about data centers that are under construction, and on the new build side of it. But across Europe, there's a massive amount of legacy data centers out there. Yeah, and that was, that's where I basically cut my teeth in the data center space initially. Was, upgrades and refurbs on, especially the banks and the telcos back in the day.
I think this is going to be the great growth area in the future, isn't it?
I do, yeah. It's going to be.
That's what we overlook, really. We look for new stuff. We don't always look at what there is existing already.
Yeah, no.
A lot of the in-house data centers will need to be refurbed extensively, really, won't they?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, and we're starting to see it already. I mean, someone told me a statistic, I don't know how true it is, but that within data centers that are, they say 30 years lifespan on them, they're going to change the IT out sort of 5-6 times over that period.
Yes.
But the electrical and mechanical infrastructure is going to get swapped out every 10-15 years, right? So,
yes.
and we can actually start to see now, from some of the older sites that are out there, that process is starting to come around again.
Billy's obviously spoken a lot about upgrades, and you've mentioned them as well. From an investor point of view, is that something that figures into conversations?
It hasn't up until now. I think it's just started. I think it was it BlackRock who was doing something on this? They were talking about buying smaller data centers rather than the really large ones. And these are ones which were kind of slightly older, which then they could redevelop and repackage as a kind of newer, more up-to-date data center with higher amount of resilience and also a higher amount of power availability. So that is something which is going to happen, I think, more and more. I think people are going to start looking at that going forward, and I think it's probably a very good opportunity.
Yeah, almost essential, I guess.
Yeah,
really. Yeah. Just moving on then. Actually, now you've mentioned AI, is it fundamentally changing design and the infrastructure associated with that type of workload?
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it depends where you go, but I was talking to some operators in Sweden, and basically what's happening is half of the data center, the ground floor, is based on concrete now.
Right.
So it's not raised floor anymore. And basically what happens is the actual water cooling is passed on pipes along the roof. And then there's an upper deck, one deck only, and that's used for, the first floor is used for air cooling.
Right.
So you get the really heavy, large NVIDIA clusters being put onto the ground floor, which can cater for the actual weight. There's about 1 ton for a huge NVIDIA cluster now, which is an enormous amount of weight to handle, and you can't really put that on a raised floor at all. And then the conventional air-cooled data center is still being used for the kind of legacy type applications, non-AI applications, where air cooling up to, 25 kilowatts per rack or so is still applicable. It can still be used.
Everyone's going down the route of putting some form of liquid cooling, typically direct to chip using CDU technology and what have you. Yes. Historically we'd use air cooled load banks to create the load inside a data hall, whereas nowadays, we have to basically put the kilowatts into that liquid. So that's fundamentally changing the way data centers are getting tested.
That's the other end of the spectrum, I suppose. There's one challenge at designing the solution. I guess it's testing and delivering it as well.
That's the big bit, isn't it?
Yeah, the main piece. I guess you've answered it off a bit there, Billy, already. But is Aggreko evolving its approach to sort of meet the demand posed by AI workloads? Yeah,
I mean, so obviously touched on what we're looking at from a liquid cooled load bank perspective, and also these AI loads, they can create havoc with generation. You know, with a cloud data center, your load's pretty linear. You know, it doesn't really create too much issue as long as you've got the megawatts of power available. But these GPUs nowadays, you know, they could go from 0 to 100% load every 2 seconds, and the transients and the noise that these things can potentially create is going to cause a bit of issue, I think, for especially for smaller generators.
So I guess looking across the market, Keith, where do you see the biggest pressure points emerging?
I think the biggest pressure points are going to be in the UK, I think, primarily because the cost of power is higher in the UK than it is in the rest of Europe.
Okay.
And that creates a problem, I think, for the large hyperscalers and others, they look at the cost of compute, and they are trying to go to those kind of areas where the cost of power is less than it would be in the UK, I think. So that could be an issue. That could be a pressure point in the future. It really depends on the government and what they want to do, if they want to actually encourage the data center industry to a large extent or not. And I think that's going to take a long time for them to resolve. And the cost of electricity in the UK as a whole for everybody is quite expensive. The UK has got to do quite a bit of catching up and look at how we actually access power and make more of it available, how the national grid actually behaves. Because there's been the way the power is allocated in the UK, it's very similar to the way it's been done in the rest of Europe. There's a first come, first served policy.
I mean, look, power's the big thing, and I know we sort of banged on about it quite a bit throughout this session. But you know, I think if we look at where we are today, and you know, there's meant to be 80 gigawatts worth of power getting used in data centers today, and by 2030 there's going to be 200 gigawatt plus. You know, I think that's gonna open up the door to a massive amount of self generation from end users themselves.
Just moving on, I mean, to conclude, really, I suppose Europe's a very mature market, I suppose, in terms of data center development and operation. Are there lessons that can be learned from other markets, do you think, in terms of the points that we've raised today, or are we all managing as we go?
It's a good question. I think in essence we're managing as we go. We're making up as we go along a little bit. But also I think I look at the developed markets and I see what's happening in Africa and the Middle East. And I just think, well, there's a kind of lesson to be learned there. How to actually provide self-generation yourself, and how to actually become a power company and release power back onto the grid and do all these kind of things. That's going to be more and more essential going forward. We need to have this kind of cooperation. And then when the power becomes available with a data center and they have this self-generation philosophy, then they can actually provide that power back into the community during when loads are not so required by the data center. So that becomes almost like a good thing for the community, because then perhaps the local school or local university or hospital can get cheaper power than they would do otherwise.
Yes.
So it's going to be a win-win, I hope.
What about you, Billy? I mean, you've obviously worked across the world, so you must see a lot.
I mean, I think America's probably like taken the lead on most of this anyway, hasn't it? Really, and most of what, you know, at the end of the day, all the big guys that are building across Europe are mainly stemmed out of the US anyway.
Yes.
So I think, you know, there's a lot of lessons learned from what they've been doing.
Just to bring it back to Aggreko and CBRE, how are your businesses adapting to this change in particular? Can you just add some more to that?
Well, I think we're having to become more of a end-to-end player, if you like. And before we were very much a real estate company, and we were looking at things where you would do things on a transaction type basis, as a kind of one-off. But now we're actually having to offer more and more services and a wraparound as well, from the actual development of a data center, which we do through our construction subsidiary like Turner and Townsend, to our facilities management offering, which we do through Global Workspace Solutions, to actual providing consultancy services as well, which we do through our digital infrastructure advisory business as well. So we're trying to put the clever things to try and put all these things together and to make it easy to use for the client, it is sometimes the most challenging part of what we do, but
yes,
it's what we're starting out to do now.
Typically the hardest challenge for any business, I suppose, making it easy for the client. So what about you, Billy? What about
I think
adapting?
I mean, most of what we're doing at the minute is speed to market, right? I touched on it earlier, right? But now, if it's going to be longer term plays and we're going to have to be cost competitive, we need to start looking at things like how we price for projects, for example, right? So rather than it being a short-term solution, start looking at PPA,
Yes.
energy as a service. Start to look down that route. I think also, with things like the with AI coming on and how things are getting tested, we need to make sure that we've got critical mass in the right places, right? So, and investing in products that we think the market's gonna want to use for the near future, and that's always a difficult one.
So Billy, you mentioned earlier about the whole life cycle of solutions, I suppose, that Aggreko can provide. Can you just speak a bit more on that, about those processes, I suppose? What do they actually look like from Aggreko's perspective?
Right. So, and utility can even be in the short term as well, right? So if it's and short term can be something that's 1 month, 3 months, or even up to 6 months. It's still pretty short term to us and how we sort of view it. A lot of the solutions that we're putting down there are for commissioning purposes, so, and that's using stage 5, tier 4 final generation. Customers looking for greener solutions with alternative fuels to be able to get them what they need. To bridging power, where something's going to go on for, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years even, right?
Yeah.
Tends to be gas as what people are looking at there, mainly because of running costs. Cost of gas versus cost of diesel or HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, is there's a massive difference on it, and also emissions, so that tends to be the main solution.
Yeah. Okay. Keith, in a similar sense, I guess, how is CBRE adapting to that whole life cycle challenge? Obviously, Billy's mentioned there that there's the power challenge, but then there's subcategories, I guess, within that challenge. So, from a similar perspective, I guess, how does that affect CBRE?
Well, I think we're looking at a range of different things, but basically we're trying to actually adapt to the market as it comes along. So we're talking about the different sources of power, having a look at renewable energy and trying to see how we can source that better for our clients. And then we're also looking at things like sustainability and how we actually put that into a data center as well.
Brilliant. Great conversation. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.